Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So simple.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this Patreon bonus content episode. I'm JD Duran, and joining me is the lovely Christian Eulinberg. Christian, it's been a little while, my friend. How we doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm finally able to let everyone know that I finally know what loss is. Again, and again.
Okay.
But thank you so much for having me on. This is I'm excited to talk about all things The Last of Us, episodes 1 through 5, of course.
Yes, that's what we're going to discuss here. You know, similar to anyone listening to this, if you're watching live on Patreon, for one, thanks for joining us. Patreon.com/InSessionFilm is where you can find us there. This will go up on YouTube after the fact as well. So regardless of how you're listening to us, really do appreciate it. And if you watched Christian and I last year, we did a version of this with the new Lord of the Rings show that came out. And I reached out to Christian. I was like, hey, it's been a little while. I want to talk about The Last of Us. So let's do it. And so on this episode, as Christian alluded to, we're going to discuss episodes 1 through 5, which is all that has been released as of this recording. And then when the first season wraps up, we'll get together and recap the whole shebang.
Yeah.
So really grateful to have you here, Christian. I think what's also interesting about this conversation is that you and I are coming at this from different angles. You have played both of the games. I have not. I've heard that they're great. My time very limited, so unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to partake in the gameage. But I was very curious about this show because of the hype of it, and of course I've heard nothing but great things about the game. So we're coming at this from different angles, and I do think that will drive much of this conversation because my thoughts on the series so far, it's not that I have questions, but perhaps my reaction to it has been a little different than I've seen with others, and I think it's possible that it's probably my disconnect from the material. Not that I've hated it. I've enjoyed it. We'll get into all of that, but I wanted to toss it to you first to get into that context a little bit more. What did you think about the games? How has that impacted your viewing experience of these first 5 episodes? What have you thought about the series as we are right now through episode 5?
So as far as my experience with the games, I think it's safe for me to say that it is probably, and I've been wrestling with this, it is probably my favorite story driven, or one of my favorites. It's like definitely top 2 story driven like video games. So between part 1 and part 2. The only thing that I think that might top it is the Mass Effect trilogy, which is like a whole nother thing. It's deep within like its own lore. There's a lot of exposition within those video games, but Naughty Dog, the gaming developer, who was also behind Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Uncharted, things of that nature, they created The Last of Us. And it was a franchise that I didn't know that I needed, because it came out, the first game came out in 2013 during a time where the like zombie craze was big. Like you had the Dead Island video games, Left 4 Dead video games, you had the Walking Dead series was starting, things of that nature. But what I liked, I think what really drove me or attracted me to The Last of Us was that it wasn't a video game like zombie franchise, because yes, you have the infected, but these humans are infected themselves with this, this virus. So they're technically still alive, but they just have zombie-like features. So it was slightly different, but the world is really what sucked me in. But coming from watching, from playing the games, because I've bought the first game more times than I care to admit, and I'm probably going to do it again for PC because I'm that much of a shell. But coming from playing the games, I always thought when I was younger, I was like, man, The Last of Us will make a really good movie. And this is before part 2 came out, because that just came out 2 years ago.
Sure.
And I thought about it some more, and I was like, well, I don't know. There's a lot that happens. Maybe it should be a television show. And then we hear that HBO is adapting The Last of Us, and everyone gets worried because traditionally video game adaptations and or video game
not a good reputation,
right? Or video games that are based off of, or games that are based off of a video game and video game adaptations. I feel like there's a there's a difference between the two, but like you said, generally they're not very good. But me watching the show, long story short, I'm sorry, I'm taking forever to answer this. But
no, it's good to hear. Yeah, it's good to hear.
I'm enjoying the show immensely.
Okay. Good to hear. Yeah. I mean, as I noted, I haven't played the games, and not only have I not played, I went into this series pretty blind. I didn't watch any gameplay. I didn't really know anything about the story other than I knew that there was this father figure. I knew he had something to do. His daughter was involved somehow. That's all that I knew. Other than that, I went in very blind.
That's pretty good for not knowing the story that's been out since 2013.
Yeah. Didn't really know much about its lore, or even that it had these zombie creatures that you had to like. I really didn't know much about it. I went in pretty blind, which was exciting in a way. It was funny though, because I did throw out a question on social media about how prepared I should be emotionally for
I remember that tweet.
this material. And of course, everyone was like, yeah, you need to prepare yourself deeply for what's about to take place. And I don't know, and I alluded to this a moment ago, I don't know if it's my disconnect from the games or how the creators here are approaching the material. I don't know if there's anything missing where they are detouring, which is why it's always interesting to me to hear from writers, critics, people like yourself, Christian, that have played these games, and then you watch the show and you're able to fill in the gaps of where is the show detouring, where is it getting creative, taking its own licenses. And I'm always intrigued to hear those things, because I do think there has been a little bit of a disconnect with the show, what it's trying to do in terms of its emotional approach and how it is affecting me. Because I'll be perfectly honest, have not shed a tear quite yet.
JD hasn't shed a tear?
Yes.
What?
Have not. I haven't. I've been moved by it. That's a little bit of a lie, but I'll get to that here in a second. But while I've been moved by it, I haven't been emotionally enthralled by it like others have been, or as it was described to me to be. And I don't know exactly what that is. Hopefully this conversation can maybe help us get to the root of that. The first episode I actually thought was kind of mediocre. I didn't really love the first episode. And I think part of it is because, and again, I don't know if this is the game.
You're totally fine. I'm just messing with you.
Well, and I'm, because I know that I'm not alone in this, but I feel like the people that have been, at least with episode 1, that felt disconnected with it, didn't play the game. I don't know if that's a universal trend or just my timeline. It could just be a coincidence. I don't really know. But when watching the show, it just felt like everything was rushed. The relationship with his daughter, I thought was pretty manufactured. And then by the time we get to toward the end of that episode and we see what takes place there, and if you're listening and watching to this, I'm assuming you've seen the show. So I think it's fair for us to get into
It's
some
been a few
spoilers
weeks.
here.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say.
just a fair warning. We'll probably get into a few spoilers here and there. But when we see what happens to his daughter, Sarah, I believe her name is,
Mm.
I didn't, that was emotionally hollow for me. I didn't
Oh.
really connect to that at all. And then we fast forward in time and we see that Joel has become this emotionally distanced, rugged person, which makes sense to me on paper. And I do think that Pedro Pascal's performance does a great job of tapping into that sensibility. But emotionally speaking, it didn't really connect to me. And then same thing with what we see with Tess as well, right? Because we're introduced to her a little bit in episode 1. It continues on more in episode 2 when you see that relationship between her and Joel, and we find out how they're involved. And then by the end of episode 2, Tess is gone. And so it's like, like we're barely introduced to their dynamic, and then it's ripped away before anything can build to it. And so again, is that how it plays out in the game, or is there more build up to it? I don't know. That's I guess for you to help me fill in the gaps there. But from a storytelling standpoint, from an outside perspective, everything is happening so quickly that it's hard for me to invest in that emotional trauma. Episode 3, different story. We'll get to that here in a second.
Yeah.
But in terms of Joel and his daughter, Joel and Tess,
the first two
and
episodes,
and what are supposed to be these strong relationships that he has, and we can assume that they do, and they more or less tell us that. But the show doesn't do enough, at least for me, to make that, like, the trauma of what happens feels very thin for me.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've yet to really, outside of like maybe a few of my friends who've never played the games, but they're actually playing the games alongside while watching the show for the first time, while playing the game for the first time. I think the only other person I've talked to about this is actually like my own mom, because she's been watching it and she loves it. But it's just my mom.
Yeah, and also let me clarify that I am liking the show.
Yeah, for sure.
And while episode 1 I thought was kind of average to me, it felt too rushed and too manufactured.
Yeah.
Despite my emotional disconnect to it, though, and like I said, even that dynamic with Tess, I still think the show on the whole is very good. Like, I do like the dynamic between Joel and Tess, how Ellie becomes involved. There's a lot about the dynamic, the setting, the production value, the performances. There's a lot that is happening mechanically that I do really like. I just wanted to speak to the emotional side of it first, because I see tweets like, "Oh my God, this episode destroyed me emotionally. It's just so overwhelming." And outside of episode 3 and a little bit of episode 5, I felt like the emotion of the show has been really contrived. It's been like, here's 3 scenes between these characters, and then you rip one of them away and go, "Aren't you emotionally moved?" No, you've given me 3 scenes.
So,
like, you can't just tell me they're close and then take one away. Like, that's not how this works. So like that's I do want to make a distinction. Emotionally, it hasn't worked for me, but everything else, like as a drama, as a thriller, that's been effective.
Yeah. So I will say, it's especially for episodes 1 and 2, for the most part, it is beat for beat what happens in the game. In the show, when it comes to Sarah, we do spend a lot more time with Sarah than we in the show versus the game. When you first start the game, it's the night of Outbreak
Like
Day.
the attack. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is night of Outbreak Day, and it just throws you in. And the relationship with Tess, that relationship between Joel and Tess ends pretty early on in the games as well, like pretty much beat for beat. We get a little bit more
Okay.
information with Tess. Like mainly, I would say that the show, especially within the first 2 episodes, fill in a lot more holes of what's going on, because you have the very first scene in the first episode when they're talking about like, oh, what if there was this, fungus global pandemic, taking over, effectively cleansing the world of us. We don't get any of that in the game. So when you're playing the game, when it comes to exposition, that is something that the players have to go and find themselves, because when you're playing a game, the developers want to keep the player busy with gameplay. So there is a lot more action in the games. But when it
Which
comes
makes
to,
sense.
yeah.
Yes.
And so, with TV, with it being more passive experience, I've been listening to the Last of Us podcast, and Troy Baker, who is the mocap and voices Joel in the games, he describes the show as a evolution of the games. I agree with that, but I also feel like it's a really nice companion piece, because we do get a lot. There's more exposition within the show that in the games you have to go out and find yourself.
Totally understand that. Yeah.
So I think for me, and I've replayed these games so many times, especially the first one, since it's been out a little bit longer. I think when TV and video games, they're both storytelling mediums, but they're very different. With video games, you have, especially with story-driven video games, you have the empathy of control, where you're like, I'm playing as Sarah. So when Sarah dies, it kills me inside, because I've spent some
you
time,
are like you're injecting your experience into the person that you're playing.
Exactly. Yeah. And not saying that TV is worse because it's passive, it's just different. So
you're observing, you're an outside observer.
And there's nothing you can do. Like whatever happens on screen happens on screen. And I feel like within the first 2 episodes, for the most part, it is beat for beat. Not every performance is the same. There is some dialogue that's taken from the game, like ripped from the game, but isn't. Some are word for word, others aren't. But I'm kind of okay with that, because I didn't want Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal to give the same word, line, and delivery as Ashley Johnson, who voices and mocaps Ellie in the games, and Troy Baker, because to me, that wouldn't be Pedro's and Bella's performances. That's just them
be regurgitating the same thing. Yeah.
So for like the first episode, I really, really loved. It took me a second, because even though I trust Craig Mazin, because he's so amazing. I mean, Chernobyl was a godsend, but
it was very good.
Yeah. And Neil Druckmann being a part of this, who is one of the, I believe he's the co-CEO of Naughty Dog right now, and the co-creator of The Last of Us. So when you have a video game adaptation that, hey, Craig Mazin loves the games, he is a big fan of the games, and you have the game's creator together, and they're working through this together, it's going to make for a good adaptation. I was nervous because you could get like maybe 2 good episodes and then the rest are terrible, but I was like, you know what, and Craig we trust because I was like, you know what, I'm fine with that. But for the first 2 episodes at least, long story short, the show fills in more holes than the games. I appreciate that we get to spend more time with Sarah.
And that's understandable. I mean, I haven't played these games, obviously, but I've played other games where you as the character, and then you do a bunch of stuff, and then in some mission, some part of the game, the character that you are playing is killed off, And there is a sense of sadness or a sense of I just went through all of that and for what?
Yeah.
And so I do understand what you're saying in that
Mm,
regard. And then also thinking about it through the lens of a film or a TV show, those same games, if they played out the same way in a film, I would have the same criticisms
yeah.
because you don't really get to know them as characters.
Right.
They're there for us to control and to experience the world, but we don't really learn anything about them, at least in the specific games that I'm thinking about.
Right.
So I can understand where you're coming from in that regard. And again, that's why I think not playing the game and not having any sort of sense of what this world is or who any of these characters are or what's about to take place. Because another thing that you all are familiar, like you guys know where this story is going. And
Yes.
there might be elements of where this ends up that in hindsight offers more context and nuance to what came previously. And you know that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And so you're able to experience these things in a much more fuller sense than me, who I don't know where this is going. I don't
Mm,
know where it's going to end up. I don't have that context. So I walk in experiencing what it is that they give me. And that first
mm,
episode, I just feel like is a little disjointed. It's very rushed. The emotion of it is contrived and hollow to me. But as it expands on the world, and as we get to see how these characters are living in this world, what this federal organization is, who are the Fireflies, what all of that means. Again, separating the emotion out as a piece of drama
mm,
and in terms of just settling us into the world, I do think the first episode does a good job of that, which is
mm.
why again, I don't think it's the worst thing I've ever seen. It's not
No,
bad.
no, no,
I
no,
just,
no, of
for
course.
me as an from an outside
Right.
perspective, I just think it's a little uneven, but where it is good, I think it's real strong. And from a filmmaking craft perspective, I love the little things of this show. To me, that's where the emotion has been strong. In that first episode, I believe it was the first episode, it's the little kid walking through the forest, and then
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
they capture him, they bring him
Towards
in,
the end
and
of the episode. Mm,
you see that that he's infected, and one of the guards there is trying to comfort him, without telling him what's about to take place. She just says, we have to clean you up, and we'll give you this little shot, and offers him this hope, and it's done with diligence and this tender poignancy. And the very next cut is to them throwing dead bodies into this burn pit, and all that it is, the clue is just a close up of the kid's shoes.
yeah.
That's all you need. And like
Mhm.
that little stuff I think is great. Like I felt way more pathos there than I did with anything between Joel and Sarah. And so I do think the craft of it after we get through that first opening 20-30 minutes or whatever, once we get into current day, I think the show really picked up steam,
Mm,
which is why episode 2 for me I thought was very good. And
mm.
despite the emotional disconnect that I have between the Joel and Tess relationship, and to be fair to the show, I I don't I don't know how much emotion it's really pulling from, really, with all of
Mm.
that. Like her sacrifice is noble. I also don't think the show in that moment is pulling for the heartstrings.
No,
Not
no, not at
not
all.
in the same way as it does in other places anyway. I think it's, if anything, it's just trying to highlight the
Yeah.
nobility of her choice there.
Right, right.
But really that relationship, because Tess is similarly this rugged, rough around the edges character that I really love. I think the actress Anya,
It's I'm blanking on her name. I've seen
yeah,
her uh in other projects as
yeah,
well.
I should have written it down, but
She's very good.
yeah,
Um
she's great. Yeah, she's very very good. Anna Torv, I
Yes,
believe
yes.
is the actress name. So
Mhm.
yeah, she's really good. And I love how she brings about that kind of brazen abrasiveness in the Tess
Mm.
character, which is very similar to Joel. I do like how all of that crystallizes. So there's certainly good things, and even just in terms of the world building of
Mm.
this whole universe, we get a lot more in part two. And I also wanted to highlight how the show goes about depicting some of this lore, because I think about that opening scene in the first episode that takes place in like the 70s or something like that.
Mhm.
Really well done. That
Yeah.
is really well staged. There's a thrilling nature to it, even though it's just a TV broadcast that is so good. And then the opening of episode 2, we get the scientist, this biologist who is familiar with these viruses, and how she's incorporated into it all, I think sets the foundation well. And then once we get to the outside and we see Boston kind of ripped apart and they're walking through the history museum and all that sort of stuff, like as a work of drama, man, I thought it was really great.
Yeah.
And then we transition into something completely different in episode 3. And episode 3 is where the emotional connection of the show really hits me, because we focus on a relationship for an hour and 20 minutes or whatever it is. So like
that's right
the show is essentially a short film, almost a feature length film, really, that episode is, right? Because
It was
it's
almost
over
2
an
hours
hour.
and they had to cut it down.
Yeah. I think it's close to an hour and 20 minutes if I'm
pretty much.
not mistaken. So it's almost the whole movie, and it's just about those two characters for the most part, right? It's just about their relationship and their life. And like in any other 90-minute feature-length film, you think of something like After Sun, because I think that's about 90 minutes, and that film obliterated me.
Yeah.
So like along those same lines, episode 3 I thought was emotionally engrossing. It was great because we got to know so much about those characters in that time than we had than anything we had with Joel, who was the main character of the show, or with Tess, or with Ellie. Like, and I understand that the film is we're eventually going to spend way more time with those characters. But by the time we got to episode 3, I felt like Frank and Bill were way more fully realized characters than anyone we had seen to that point. And it was like, as a singular isolated episode of television, they should just quit TV the rest of the year, because you are not going to beat that episode. It is truly astounding.
Yeah, Emmys are coming up, man. It's I for the Emmys, it's like I kind of have it in back. I mean, last year I was like, oh my gosh, like, Stranger Things is going to be there next year. We're going to have Better Call Saul. We're going to have House of the Dragon. We're going to have The Mandalorian, like all this stuff. And then The Last of Us comes out, and I'm like, okay, so this is winning best drama. But for episode 3, it is the biggest deviation from the games.
And that's what I've heard. I have heard that. Yeah.
Because in the game, you run into Bill is alive when you get to Bill's town. He's rigged it all up with traps. And you go through these, like when you first run into Bill, you are caught by one of his traps. You're actually hanging upside down, and a bunch of infector are coming towards you, and you have to shoot them. It's actually harder because you're upside down for like a very long time.
Oh wow.
But yeah, Bill comes in. What I like about the deviation is that even though we have this big deviation from the game that's in the TV show, it still ends up from point A to point B, because when you go to Bill's town, you end up with a car and car battery, and you leave from there.
Yeah,
and
that's what happens. Yeah.
So, but when it comes to the show, because Frank's already dead in the game, because he was tired of Frank was tired of Bill's like selfish ways. He's very selfish. Taurus is, what can you do? But yeah, Frank is already dead. He like hangs himself, and he like steals the car battery and like it's this whole thing. But I like how we were able to spend time with Bill and Frank because we didn't get to really in the games. We got to spend time with Bill, but we didn't get to see that other side of Bill. And once you leave Bill's town in The Last of Us, that's the last time you ever, and I mean ever, see of Bill. He's not in part 2 in the video games at all. He's mentioned. We don't know if he's dead. We don't know if he's alive. It's just the last time you see Bill, but they do mention him a little bit in part 2. Ellie does.
Gotcha.
But
yeah. Man, incredible episode of television. It is truly breathtaking. And yeah, I have heard that it is a massive deviation from the game. But what a perfect way to deviate, right? Because you're able to still get to where you need to by the end regarding the truck and the battery, right? So you're still able to get there, but instead of it being the way that you described, which sounds a little bit more bleak and harrowing.
It's very bleak. Yeah.
And, this is so beautiful and gorgeous. And I think what I love about it is you have these characters that are clearly fond of each other. They are striving for, some sense of normalcy. And beyond that, this romanticism that does not go, like, your humanity just doesn't stop just because there's a zombie apocalypse outside.
Right.
And so they're doing their best to survive and, within the chaos, but also indulge that humanity and that romanticism. And it's so gorgeous and beautiful, but you have to love when those lines become blurred. To me, that's what's so fascinating. It's not just that the relationship itself is beautiful, which it is, and the performances are great. Murray Bartlett, Nick Offerman, both astounding here. But I do love how there is this duality because they do have to contend with not just these zombies, or they're called something different in this lore. Forgive me, I can't remember what it is.
Infected.
Yeah. So there's the infected, and then there's, of course, always going to be just regular people who are almost worse. That you have
10
to
times
deal
worse.
with.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah. And so they're trying to protect themselves. Bill especially has created these clever ways to protect themselves. And at any time that becomes a little bit threatened, he is very unsure. But because he loves Frank, he's willing to indulge him. And you see those lines become blurred in these fascinating ways that are both beautiful, at times a little bit tense, when Frank is wanting to invite some people over that he's been talking to people on the radio. Like, Bill loses his mind, just absolutely loses it. But at the end of it, still gives Frank what he wants because he loves him. And that's really all that it is. And then it ends on just the most incredibly gorgeous yet devastating moment between the two of them, where they're both, they want to go out together. And goddamn Max Richter, that piece of music on The Nature of Daylight is never not going to be perfect. It is, anytime it is utilized, especially in this context, it is so moving. It is so good. It's such an impeccable piece of music that will live on forever. I do love how it's utilized here. That sequence where that music is played and we see them have that day together. No other television is going to beat that in 2023. I mean, it's over. The race, just hand them the award now. Like, it's done.
It's done. It's over.
It's so good.
I didn't realize, like, because I recognized that that piece from Arrival
Yes, he's an
And I
arrival, which
didn't
I love as
realize
well.
I was like, I've heard this before somewhere. And I'd look it up.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's in Shutter Island as well,
Yeah,
I
it's in a
believe.
lot of
It's in
movies.
a lot of
Yeah.
movies. And it's
Mhm.
man, it's so
It's
like
so good though.
elegant,
Yeah.
it's like angelic, but it's
Yep.
somber. It has this melancholy
Yeah,
effect to it
very.
as well. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh man, I'm like, Craig Mason, why are you doing this to me?
Exactly. No, it's good. And then speaking of the emotion, because I talked about earlier how I haven't really been like overtly emotional throughout this series so far. Episode 3 though was really great. I was touched by it, deeply, deeply touched by it. And then we get to episode 5. We'll skip episode 4 for the moment. But in
Mm,
episode 5, in the moment, like as I was watching it, I wasn't moved to tears. But that episode had this lingering effect where, I don't know, a half hour after watching it and then thinking about Sam and Henry and what had taken place, I found myself uh just kind of isolated and getting emotional thinking about it. So it
mm,
was one of those episodes where in the moment I wasn't, it didn't move me to tears then, but just that lingering effect of what happened. And you think about Sam and just the heartbreaking nature of what was happening to him already, and then how it all crystallizes in the end, and just the rough nature of his childhood. And I found myself uh
yeah.
pretty emotional sometime afterwards. So I think episode 5 ended up being the other moment for me
Mm,
that's really great. And I think what's interesting about the episode though is, again, as you're watching it, it really isn't that it's kind of bleak. It's more bleak and devastating than it is outwardly emotional, I think.
oh yeah. Mm,
Because and it's a little bit tense. They're trying to get through the city, and again, they're trying to survive. They think that maybe they have overcome, their hurdles, and they get through the tunnels and they're on the other side, only to be stopped by this sniper. And then all of a sudden hell breaks loose.
yeah.
And then it becomes this moment of action, which is really great. So like as you're watching the episode, there really isn't a lot of emotion there.
No.
And then we learn, and then in those final moments, we
Mm,
learn some more truth about Sam, and we learn about his experience and what was really happening to him. And then the way it plays out, and it happens so fast, right? Where
yeah.
Ellie's like, Sam, then there's this moment of action again, and Henry has to react suddenly. So by the time it happens, and then you realize what had happened, like it was more tense and dramatic than it was emotional. So once the episode ends and you can just waft in what happened, that's when the emotion comes, which I think was deliberate. I think they kind of built the show out that episode anyway out like that
Yeah. I mean,
purposely.
that plays out pretty much.
Yeah.
A few small little tweaks here and there when you have um Ellie does show Sam that she is immune, but in the
Mhm.
game she does not try to heal
Yeah. She doesn't
Sam.
do the cult
She
thing.
no,
Yeah.
no,
Take
no,
my
she
blood.
doesn't.
Yeah.
But he also does not reveal Sam. Well, first of all, Sam in the game is 13, so he's only a year younger
Mm,
than Ellie, and he's
gotcha.
not
Okay.
deaf
Yeah.
in the game either. But I think him being deaf and then seeing his leukemia, I was like, oh, this is just I was torn all over again. But it added an extra layer because you have in the show again, you're adding those extra characteristics to Sam, which makes him more reliable on Henry, which is essentially a foil in a way between Joel and Ellie. But anyway, I digress. I'm going all over the place. But
Mhm.
Sam doesn't tell Ellie that he's infected in the game. But they do have the conversation of, hey, he asks, he's like, do you think, is it still you inside, after you turn? And she talks about, her being afraid to end up being alone, things of that nature. But there's also like this toy in the game where there's a few things they left out from the game, but it's like, again, I'm fine with adaptation as long as it works. And it works extremely well in episode 5. But there's this toy that Sam picks up while they're with Joel and Ellie, because you spend a little bit more time with them in the game, but obviously, games are a little bit longer than a TV episode.
Yeah.
But Henry constantly tells Sam, no, like, we only take what we need. Like, you don't need that toy. But Ellie swipes it for him and he gives it to him later on when they're like together. But I don't know, man, that it really just kills me every time I think about it. Cause I mean, I've played the game God knows how many times. And it's like, when it gets up to that point, when it comes to like the sniper's in the game a little bit different. Has a better shot because you die a lot during that part.
Some old guy who can't see.
Yeah. But I mean, the bulldozer is there, but there's also this tank that's running through, because in the game you're in Pittsburgh.
You're in Pittsburgh,
yeah.
So they changed it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I don't know why they did. It is what it is.
Because they knew the Chiefs were going to win the Super Bowl. That's why.
Oh man. A lot of people are, holding in Kansas City.
Exactly.
All I gotta say. But
imagine if it was Philadelphia.
They're a very grabby city.
Yeah, really grabby city. Yeah. Instead of Pittsburgh, what if it was Philadelphia? That would have been the only thing to make it perfect, more perfect.
Soothsayers, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
But yeah, episode 5, it was just phenomenal. So the bloater that's in episode 5, in the game you actually encounter a bloater earlier when you're in Bill's town, and Bill helps you fight him off, because after a bloater dies it explodes, hence why it's called like a bloater. But it's also someone who's been infected for a very long time. So
we don't really see that in this episode, do we? I don't think.
No, I mean, you see a bloater, but
but we don't see him die and explode, though,
no,
right?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Because after the moment with Kathleen, they just run off, right? I believe is what happened. So
yeah, I believe so.
So as far as we know, Kansas City is now overrun by the infected. Like, we don't, they don't, like, and that's
Eagles
another
fans.
thing too about the writing of the show, that and again, maybe this is just a byproduct of the game, and I understand that we want to spend more time with our central duo here,
right?
But it's just so, I don't know what the word is, interesting. I don't know the purpose of diving into Kathleen and her drama, and we need to find Sam and we need to find Henry, and here's a little bit about how I grew up with my brother and I'm mad because he's now dead. None of that means anything. Like the film or the show does not do anything to make sense of any, like, you could have, it's all wasted. Like, you could just write all that out and nothing changes.
Yeah, well, Kathleen's not in the game at all. Like, when you meet Sam and Henry, they're just meeting up with a group of people at like a radio tower. And there is a point in the game where Sam and Henry actually ditch Joel and Ellie for a certain amount of time, and then they regroup. And then Joel's like super pissed, but then he kind of gets over it. There's like a part where they like where Joel and Ellie, like, they get caught by, I think it's Fedra at the time, and they like jump off of this bridge into like this like rapid rushing water. It's crazy. Like, Ellie jumps off first. She's like, it's now or never. And she just runs and jumps straight off. And he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I got to follow her. So, But yeah,
that to me is just, it's real interesting. I will say Melanie Linsky is great. I
Yeah.
do love her performance. She does tiptoe this line of
Professor Umbridge,
well,
kind of, sort of.
well, it's interesting to me because she's both a little menacing. You like, she's a little forceful, but also she has this quality that makes her seem approachable. Like you can like if you can have like a conversation with her and walk away unharmed. Like she carries that facade. I like, it's real interesting how she's able to do that.
Yeah.
Because like in those moments when she's talking with the doctor or with those prisoners, it's like, oh, okay, like I could see her like being genuine here. Like, okay, she's gonna not shoot him. She's gonna let those people go.
Yeah.
Like she just has like this very
good
borderline
cop,
playful
she has everything
delivery, but it also carries like this underlying like menacing tone at the same time. Like it's really great. And we learn a little bit about what's happening in Kansas City and with her brother, but to no avail. Like it really means nothing. Like it's this giant red herring, which I kind of maybe appreciate, but also I'm like, why? Like, does it matter? Like that you tell us all these details when in the end
it really
we're
ties
just
into
it all
Henry's backstory. I will say, for episode 5,
it ties into Henry a little bit, but if anything,
she's definitely
you could
the
argue
weakest part. Like I love how we're getting all of that because it makes the world feel more.
It makes
out.
it, I if anything, but I do think it's a little uneven because it's like I would have rather of the show spent more time, because we do get a scene where Henry tells us what he did, but I also think at the same time it could have dug a little bit further into why he made those choices, and really exploring that character a little bit further. In some ways, I kind of appreciate that the show, at least with Henry, you kind of have to do the work a little bit to infer why he made those choices. But I guess selfishly, I wish that the show was less about Kathleen and her brother, which ultimately means nothing to the show, and more about Henry and Sam and that dynamic. Because when it's focused on that, it's really great. Really, really great. The whole scene of them in that little, that upstairs area, and he's drawing on the walls, and there's the whole superhero nature of it all, and what that means symbolically for Sam. All of that is impeccable. Really, really great. And shout out to, is it Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin. Yeah, Sam.
He's really good.
Oh, insanely good. I was like,
an extra shout out because Kevin, big hockey guy.
Really?
Big hockey guy.
I'm going to a hockey game this weekend. Sam the Preds game. My first hockey game ever.
Well, how exciting. We'll have to talk about that offline.
Yeah.
Because we'll get down a rabbit hole we don't need to right now. But that's exciting. I'm very curious to hear about that. But yeah, Kevin is a big hockey guy. And I read an article earlier this week where he has his sights on being the first deaf black player in the NHL. So that is an ambition of his, which I think is really, really exciting. So
I think it's very exciting.
But his performance here is fantastic. It is so good. And Lamar Johnson as Henry, I think, is also great. Which is why, again, maybe it's selfish on my end because, Linsky is great. I'm not taking anything away from her performance. I just don't think the writing around the whole Kansas City thing as a whole, or her drama, means like in the end it's a red herring, which maybe that's compelling enough, or I could see that being an argument. But because Sam and Henry is so great, and the Kathleen stuff, like Sam and Henry's relationship, or any further nuance you could get into, that comes at a cost of the red herring. So it's a double-edged sword. Like I would much rather spend more time with Henry and Sam personally. But on the whole, though, episode 5 was great. It was very good. So I'm getting into a little bit of nitpicky territory there.
You're
But
good.
but Sam and Henry is
It was
fantastic.
perfect, man. I was
It's so good.
I was wondering, I was like, okay, who's going to voice who? You have the guy with like the long beard, who gets like destroyed by the clicker. Like when he rips open his jaw, like that's the way, like anytime you get caught by a bloater in the game, like that same thing happens. Like he rips open, like it's crazy. But the guy with like the super long beard, I forgot his character, but he is the mocap actor / voice actor of Joel's brother Tommy in the video games.
Gotcha.
Because as soon as I heard his voice, I'm like, oh, that's Tommy. Like that's Tommy. So I love how they were able to repurpose some of these actors. You have Marlene, who is the same actor from the video game as well. So she gets to spend even more time with her. And I love how they're able to repurpose a lot of these people. It has already been said, this is not like, insider scoop news or anything like that, but they've already announced that Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker will make an appearance in the series.
Okay.
I know who Ashley Johnson is playing, but I don't want to say anything, just in case, but I'm very interested to see how certain things, there are a lot of other scenes that I'm wondering how it's going to not feed into narrative, but how fluid it will flow with the story. Because there's certain things that happen. I don't want to say anything, so that's why I'm trying to like.
No spoilers. I haven't played the game. Keep that in mind.
But it'll get here when it gets here.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to have that conversation when we end up doing part 2 of our conversation here, because my final thought really on these first 5 episodes, like I said, I'm invested. I think it's on the whole been very good, even if I haven't been as emotionally enthralled as most others have been. The one thing I'm more concerned about, I'm less concerned about the emotional side of it and more concerned about redundancy, because at this point, what we have so far is characters that are expendable, and these one-off episodes especially, right? So and again, I understand this is a byproduct of the game, and that the TV show is adapting that material. And so I assume that this same kind of trajectory is going to go forward. But as a TV show, how do you keep it interesting if, from a plotting perspective, it's all kind of playing out the same? And what I mean specifically is, you think about Sarah in episode 1, right? Then there's Tess in episode 2. Even, she was in episode 1, but, an episode and a half, we'll say.
Yeah.
And then she's gone. Bill and Frank, one-off episode. And then you get to Kathleen, 2 episodes, but Sam and Henry, basically 1 episode, and then they're gone. So it's like every episode, it's introduce character, they're gone. Introduce character, they're gone. At a certain point, where, like, how do you overcome the formula?
I can't say anything, but I think you're going to be interested in the story moving forward.
Okay. And maybe it'll shift to a different formula, like, because that's where I'm maybe a little bit concerned. But at the same time, and I've said this about Marvel, this is my big thing with IP franchises on the whole, because they all follow a certain formula, depending on whatever the franchise is, what the formula is. And to me, I don't really care about that as much as I am concerned with execution. Like for me, like when it comes to art, I like, my ethos is the Roger Ebert thing of, it's not what it's about, it's how it's about. I will die on that hill. I do not care what it is about. Especially in 2023, there are very few things that you're going to throw at us to go, I have never seen that before ever in media. We've seen it. We've seen it
time and time again.
And time again.
Yeah.
It is how you do it. Like,
Exactly.
After Sun, I keep going, like, After Sun is my favorite film of 2022. That is about a father and a daughter on a vacation. There's nothing new about that on its own that's new.
Right.
Like that, like we've seen that
It's
before.
about how it's
but
executed.
but
Yeah.
how it goes about doing it, especially
Mhm.
with its structure and how it's looking back, it's about memory. That's what makes that film great. So, I do want to preface by saying that I'm concerned a little bit about the redundancy factor, but even if it maintains that and it does it extremely well, like I'm still okay. But like I said, it's a slight concern. But that's kind of my final thought right now
Yeah.
as we move forward to the back
Because we
half
have
of this
4 more
season.
episodes left.
Yeah.
It's 9 total.
Mhm.
I was not sent screeners at all. I just wanted to let everyone know because I know some people have sent screeners because you have people who
Yeah.
are tweeting about like, oh, like getting ready for like this week's episode. I do
Mhm.
feel like, and I'm not sure, maybe this is what happened to you, or maybe it's just how you feel about the story overall. Because
Yeah.
I'm assuming that people have told you it's like pretty much like one of the best like stories ever told in video games. Like there's this big hype factor
Yeah, that's
that
all
comes
I've
along
heard.
with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel, and I hate it when people do this to me where they're like, oh my gosh, like you're not ready. You are not ready. I'm like,
And
okay,
that's
like I get it.
that,
Yeah.
that's all I keep
And
hearing.
I
That's all I
feel like
keep hearing.
sometimes people, it sets people's expectations too high.
Mhm.
Like I forgot what movie it was. It was, I think when I watched Nomadland, I had no clue what this movie was about. I forgot who I was talking to. And they're like, oh my gosh. They're like, Christian, you are not ready for this. I'm like, oh yeah, like let's go. Completely underwhelmed. I was like, oh,
Okay.
I was kind of disappointed. I was expecting something else because the
Mhm.
way that this person was explaining it to me made it seem like it was like this, not like an action
Yeah.
movie, but like this like devastating, like emotional wreck, like some big twist or something was coming. So I kept
Yeah.
waiting for it and nothing happens. What I mean, but
Mhm.
I'm just using it as a small example. But yeah, when I feel as if people are like, they're trying to get you on the hype train, and like, yeah, I think people should watch it, but I don't want to oversell it because not everyone is going to be as attached to this story as I am. Because I mean, I've been playing these games since 2013. Like the story's been around forever, but it's now hitting a mainstream audience.
Mhm.
And that is where things start to change. It's just like Pokemon. Like, I mean, Pokemon was originally a video game property first and foremost. Then the TV show came. Then you had the trading card game. Then you have the movies. Now it's this everything franchise. And I
Yeah.
think The Last of Us is somewhat evolving into that. We don't know if we're getting a part 3 in the video games or not. Neil Druckmann said that they're working on a story, but if they can't figure out something that works, then they're content with the events ending in part 2. And I'm like, okay, that's valid because I don't want them to just make something and then like, oh, well, we
Yeah.
have to make more because, well, it's popular, so we have to make more. It's like, well, no, let's not run into the
Mhm.
Walking Dead effects.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing too, and I don't know if that's part of my hesitation or maybe
Mm,
why I never played the games. I don't know. Because back in, when the first game came out, like Walking Dead was absolutely massive at that time. And I
it's
had
huge.
I had watched that show religiously for a long time, and then it just became so tedious.
Mm.
And I jumped ship, and then I just really haven't done zombie apocalypse since. Like I pretty much avoided it since then. Like this is kind of my first
Yeah,
foray back into it. So,
yeah. I
but
think for the
I
next 4 episodes, you're going to be very, very pleased. There's been
okay.
things that Ellie's been alluding to about her past and within these 5 episodes, but that's all
Okay.
I'll say on that. But I think you'll be interested in the rest of the story.
Well, I guess as we wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts on these first 5 episodes before we get out
I
of here?
just I think it's a work of art. I mean, this might just be me, being like, a gamer for such a long time since I was like 5, but I mean, I just want to say it is possible in the right hands for some of these video games to have either proper adaptations when it comes to the story driven video games, and
Mhm.
for other studios, I hope they follow suit, because after I heard that this was The Last of Us was going to be on HBO, I like immediately was like less worried, because I was like, well, this is HBO we're talking about. Like,
Mhm.
rarely do they miss. Like, TV is their bread and butter.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, Craig Mazin, now this is getting more interesting. And then, the whole thing with Pedro Pascal, I was like, oh my God, Game of Thrones actor saving television once again. But
Yeah.
I really do agree with what Troy Baker was saying. It is an evolution of the games.
Mhm.
We, like, me as a gamer, I'm appreciating it so much more because I get to spend more time with characters that I necessarily didn't get to in the game, because in the game, like, the story beats are there,
Yeah.
but it is more about the gameplay and the action that comes with the gameplay. The
Mhm.
show is a bit reversed because we don't get as much action in the game. I mean, in the show. And there's also, when it comes to the infected, there's the spores in the video games. But Craig Mason was saying, for a TV adaptation, realistically, like, if you like inhale spores, that is another way that you can become infected. So
Mhm.
realistically, in a TV show, spores would be everywhere. So that's why they
Mhm.
replace it with the tendril things, which I think is pretty interesting. But
Mhm.
overall, I'm really enjoying every single episode. I've absolutely loved.
Yeah.
Just seeing, obviously I know where the story goes, but just having even a more deeper appreciation for people who are recognizing, video game stories and treating them with respect first
Yeah.
and foremost. And but it's
Yeah.
been a great ride, and I'm interested to see what other changes they make.
Yeah, I'm really curious for how this is going to end with this first season anyway. And really with my last final thought, I just want to emphasize again how much I appreciate the lore and the world building here, and how it is intertwined with the storytelling and the drama. And again, coming from the world of something like The Walking Dead, this is so vastly different despite it essentially being the same thing, like
Yeah.
fundamentally, but the details are so different. And I love learning about how the infected are kind of all connected in this weird way. And I'm sure that, I imagine anyway, the show is building to something large in that way. Um, and I'm just real curious to learn more about how the country is coping as our duo moves more out west, and do they find the person that they're trying to find, and where all of that goes. So I certainly have my concerns. I was moved by episode 3, the aftermath of episode 5. I was moved as well. So the emotion of it is starting to come along a little bit more with me. So perhaps when or if a sledgehammer comes by the end of the season, maybe I'll be prepared for that when it comes. So I am really curious to see how it all kind of comes together. But as someone who, again, coming from an outside perspective, a little bit of a slow and uneven start for me, but I've really started to appreciate what this is aiming to do and how it is trying to differentiate itself, which is why I think this is one of those series that once I see it, and also maybe once I do come to play the games, hopefully I'll get to that, which might be a little bit it could be a little bit of a while, because I don't think that I'll stop playing this new Harry Potter game, or
Dude,
this
I
Wizarding World game,
know. Oh
for the
my
next year and a half.
gosh.
It's so
Dude,
addictive.
I was
So-
tearing up.
Yeah.
Fair
So I've been doing a lot of that, but I say all that to say that if I ever do get to the game and because of how much I'm starting to appreciate this season more and more, that on a rewatch, if I go back and revisit those first couple of episodes and I have more context in mind, that maybe those criticisms I have will start to dissipate a little bit anyway. I don't know if they'll fully go away, but they might be able to alleviate a little bit anyway on rewatches. But I am really liking it a lot, and I do want to emphasize, because we haven't really talked about it too much, but Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal are very good. Their performances are also great, and I love how others have pointed out that this is essentially the Mandalorian part 2 for Pascal. I do love that.
Yeah, we get the Mandalorian in pretty much 2 weeks, so we get more Pedro Pascal in our lives.
I just want more of Pedro Pascal looking after younger characters and trying to get them from one place to another, not letting them die. Like that's the cinematic universe we've all been craving for. Yes. And it's here finally. So I do love that. I am on the whole very excited for what the rest of this series could look like. And then we'll get together here in 4 weeks, right? I believe you said there's only 4 more episodes left.
9 total altogether. So
okay,
yeah, it's gonna be a wild ride. I'm like, man, I can't believe we're already here. I'm like, 4 episodes doesn't seem like a long time, but got another month.
Got another month, and then so Christian and I will get together at the end of that, and we'll talk about these last 4 episodes, and then I'm gonna be disappearing for a while because I'm gonna have a new baby. I think people know this. My wife is pregnant. We're getting close. We're getting close. So come March, late March, I will be busy in a different way. So but we'll try to get through a couple more weeks, some more films, last 4 episodes of The Last of Us. At any rate, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks to our patrons. If you want early access to content like this, sign up at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. And of course, if you're listening to this on YouTube after it comes out, thanks for listening as well. Be sure to like and subscribe the video. And we really do appreciate it. Thanks, Christian, for being here, man. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me, man. And remember, for everyone out there, endure and survive.
Endure and survive. We'll end on that note. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Last of Us. It's good. I'm liking it. It's good.